Hello there. My name is Helene Ortman, and I'm a longtime volunteer with the Bright Run, and I just happen to be a breast cancer survivor myself. I'm delighted to be talking with Dr. Katie Houlahan. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So, Dr. Houlahan, if you feel comfortable with us, could you share any information or any story you have that might be related to breast cancer or even cancer in general?
Yeah. So, my first introduction, unfortunately, to cancer, as many of us are fortunately linked in some way or another, was at the age of 9 when my 6-year-old sister was diagnosed with Wilms tumor. So, Wilms tumor is a tumor on the kidney, and she was diagnosed with a tumor the size of a rugby ball, which you could imagine in a 6-year-old is quite substantial. I will say she's been 20 years cancer free. So we're really fortunate about that. But it showed me firsthand, even in a cancer type that at the time had very good prognosis for her, the impact to her body in terms of the treatments and in terms of, her life over that year and a bit was really significant. So you can imagine a 6-year-old, she lost a lot of weight, she lost her hair during the chemo treatments. And it showed me firsthand, even in these cancers, that fortunately treatments have really improved overall prognosis. The treatments, nevertheless, can be hugely detrimental on quality of life, particularly if we're talking about some of these more systemic treatments like chemotherapy. And so it introduced me at a young age to what cancer was. I actually don't ever remember thinking definitively, yes, 100% I want to study cancer. I want that to be my career in the future. But it also sort of always felt right along the way. And I've always been really interested in cancer, probably in part because I saw what it could do. And I was very confused how our own cells could kind of turn against us and lead to such a devastating disease. So it really was these early ages, and then through school and opportunities, I've found myself here. But I've always been really intrigued by what causes cancer and how we can best stop it as early as possible.
We're so happy to hear how well your sister is doing, first of all. That's great.
Thank you.
Tell us, do you have a Bright Run team or are you associated with one?
So this past year during the run, we teamed up with the Pirates of the Caribbean. So this is a long-standing team that's been involved with the Bright Run for many years, spearheaded by Juliet Daniels. And Juliet is actually one of my colleagues. Her office is just down the hall. So we were fortunate, myself and one of my students joined this past year, and we were fortunate to join her team and run alongside her and her lab.
Great. As a first-time participant at the Bright Run, do you have a particular memory, an impression?
I mean, it was a beautiful sunny day. It was my first time at Christie Lake. So recently moved to Hamilton. So it was a nice exposure to the conservation areas. And I was just so impressed by the turnout, the energy. You could tell people have been coming back year after year, and teams had t-shirts or costumes, and you had a sense that this has been an event that people look forward to and have participated in for many, many years. So, I really, it was a great way to start a weekend with that energy and that enthusiasm, and certainly helped motivate me to go back home and finish working on some of our grants and our projects and our research.
hmm That's wonderful. It truly is a community. It'll be again this coming September, as of course you know, September 12th. And what you may not know is it's our 19th annual.
Oh, fantastic. No, it's so great to hear that this is such an ongoing, and you can tell there's real community involvement, which is great to see.
Yes, yes. So tell us, on any given day, where would we find you? Where are you located?
So, myself and my team are located on McMaster's campus. We're actually located in a building connected to just behind the McMaster Children's Hospital. And our team is on the same floor as the other researchers from the Center of Discovery and Cancer Research, which just means that we have, I think, 10 or so labs that are all studying cancer, all in the same space. So it makes for a lot of great collaboration and innovation across teams that are all doing slightly different things, but all focused on the same disease. And it's a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary environment, which is a lot of fun.
hmm So you're principal investigator, is that correct, of the particular research project you're involved with?
Yes, exactly. So what that means is, I am the one that'll be overseeing, but I'm not the one that will be actually executing. So I have a really talented team of masters and undergraduate students that are actually doing the research. My job is just to help to motivate them. And honestly, most of the time I just nod my head and go, "That sounds like a great idea. Let's do that." They're a fantastic group.
It sounds to me like you love mentoring.
I do. It is 100% the best part of my job. When I was deciding on a career path, I knew I wanted to stay in science. I knew I wanted to stay in research, specifically cancer research. But you could tell that there's a lot of institutions out there, both academic or industry, that are doing some fantastic science. And of course, as someone in research, the age-old question is, where do you go? Where do you focus your efforts? And I knew beyond the science, my favorite part of the job was mentoring, and I wanted to find a place that really emphasized mentoring. I knew I'd be spending time doing it regardless because it's something I really enjoy doing. So I wanted also to be in an environment where that was encouraged and supportive. And so that's how I ended up here. But there's no question my favorite part of the day is when my students come into my office and we can talk about the science, we can talk about ideas, we can figure out what comes next. And it's really fun to watch as they take the project from initiation all the way through to completion, and kind of seeing their ideas grow along the way too.
Now, you've got me curious. What is your actual breast cancer project? What's the title of it? And then, in plain language, describe what it means.
Yeah, so the title of the project is Repurposing Clinical Sequencing Data for Broader Breast Cancer Susceptibility Profiling, which is a mouthful, but really drilling that down, what this means is we know in cancer there are a select number of genes that we know are tightly linked to increased risk of an individual developing breast cancer. And so these have been defined. Tests have been developed to actually look for them in individuals who might suspect that they have them, might have family history of breast cancer. But even if you are diagnosed with these genes, you may not get breast cancer. And your likelihood of getting breast cancer might be really high for some genes, but might only be moderate for some other genes. And so making decisions on what that means and if there's any steps you should take can be really difficult. And so myself and others have shown that there's actually regions of our DNA outside of these genes that can also inform on likelihood of developing breast cancer. But these regions aren't directly measured from these tests. And so we wanted to know if we could use byproducts of these tests, even if they're not designed for this. We know that these byproducts, this other information exists. And so can we measure some of these other DNA regions from these tests and see if they're also associated with likelihood of developing breast cancer? And so the hope here is that you would have that initial, do you have the gene, but then you could further inform your risk of developing breast cancer by adding these additional regions of your DNA, so that it's not just, when you make your decision whether you want to increase your screening or you might want to be a little bit more drastic and have surgical intervention, you have more information about your likelihood of developing breast cancer to make that informed decision.
How long will it take to conduct your research?
So this project that we proposed is more of what we're calling a feasibility study. And so it's a pilot study. We're looking at 50 individuals to see if we can measure these other regions of the genome. So this project proposed 2-year study, but the hope is this information will allow us to expand to a much larger study with multiple individuals and actually start to see if these other regions are associated with risk. So this is just the first step of what will hopefully be a much longer term study, and ideally working towards things like clinical trials to see if we can find really solid evidence that we should include these as a new standard of care. But this initial study is 2 years.
So, why and how would Bright Run dollars be important to you and to the work you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think about this as this funding is important for three reasons. So, reason number one is there are a few funding bodies that are really require you to have a lot of data before they fund a project. They want to see that this project is feasible, that they have a lot of preliminary data, as we refer to it, of its success. And that can be really challenging to generate, especially for a lab like me and my lab that's just getting started. And so for the Bright Run to help us with that initial data to support the project right from these initial efforts is huge, because this will allow us to generate the data to support the expansion of this project more broadly. So that's number one. From a scientific perspective, it really allows us to show proof of concept of our ideas. Number two, as a junior lab, like I said, it can be a bit tricky to get going because you don't have history of data, and you're just trying to get started. And so having the Bright Run invest at this early stage means a lot, because it allows me to and my team to develop the data, develop the infrastructure that we need to expand our ideas. But then finally, this money is going directly to support trainees. In fact, there's a master's student that's being supported by this Bright Run. So it's also helping to support really the next generation of scientists as they undergo their training, and then hopefully one day maybe start their own lab and have their own ideas. And so it's really impactful on multiple stages, from science to infrastructure to trainee support directly.
I think you've explained that so well. A lot of team captains will be watching this, will be listening to you, participants, people who are fundraising, community partners who are donating money, to help buy and defray some of the costs that it takes to put the Bright Run together. And in what you've just said, there's just so much accountability back to people who are fundraising, back to people who are giving. And that's really critical for donors and activated people to hear.
Research takes time. And obviously, what we're doing is we want to be very rigorous in our studies to make sure anything that we're suggesting or informing is actually improving patient care. But I think, you know, we understand too what it's like, not as a cancer survivor, but at least someone who's been very tightly linked to the cancer journey. I know firsthand the uncertainty that people feel during that time. And so, my thought to that is just that we understand, and we're doing our best to provide as much information as possible, and really leverage as much insights out of the data we have as possible to help people make those tricky decisions, especially in those early phases of diagnosis. And so, certainly we hope that in the next few years, as this starts to grow and we can start to see, the fruits of this labor, that hopefully we'll be able to provide novel tests for individuals moving forward. But yeah, we understand, and we're really trying to work towards helping improve specifically early detection, because that's where I think the best hope of improving cancer care is just detecting it earlier when it's most treatable.
One of the last questions I had, and you may have already answered it, is if you could share a core message with, in particular, breast cancer patients thinking about their future, what's happening in terms of research and advancements, what might you say to people like us?
So I think the kind of coolest part, or the most exciting part about breast cancer research right now is really the understanding that breast cancer is this big term, right? But individually, everyone's disease is so distinct. And so there's a lot of insights now from actually looking at each individual's tumor to better understand what's driving the cancer and to target that specifically. So, of course, the most exciting advancement in the last number of years has been the anti-HER2, or the treatment of HER2 positive breast cancer. But we're starting to see evidence of similar treatments for other breast cancer subtypes that might be able to better improve prognosis there as well. So, really, the personalized nature of thinking about breast cancer and having personalized treatments is where I get excited about, and hopefully will be some advancements in the future.
We're so delighted to have you on our team, not just a Bright Run team, but on our team in terms of the Juravinsky and McMaster. You're a great scientist. You're very, very enthusiastic, and you bring a human warmth and a human face to all of this at the same time. For that, we are really, really grateful.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure chatting with you today.
We'll see you out at the Bright Run on September 12th.
Sounds perfect.